Hi, I'm Steve, and welcome to the American Garage. Today on the American Garage, we're going to take a little field trip out of the garage and go look at some antique boat motors. We've got a prime example of an antique boat motor right here. This one is a Lockwood Ace, built in 1928 in Jackson, Michigan. This particular motor was a saltwater version. You can tell by the way it's all solid bronze. Today what we're going to do is we're going to look at some American ingenuity that took place back then and how people are restoring and maintaining them today. Let's go have a look. Today at the Boat Motor Show, we're going to talk to Louis Rothermel.
My name is Louis Rothermel. I have been collecting outboard motors since 1983. At approximately that time, I joined the Antique Outboard Motor Club, which was started in 1965 by my good friend Dave Reinhardtson. It was founded here in the state of Texas, so Texas is the #1 chapter. I am a member of the Texas chapter, and today we're at a Texas chapter swap meet in Houston, Texas. I collect primarily motors from about 1917 to 1954. I have about, 80 motors in various stages of restoration. Most of the motors that I have you cannot buy the parts for, so I collect more than one motor to restore a complete motor. At this time, our club runs about 4 meets a year. We have a swap meet here, we have 3 wet meets, and it's just a very innovative hobby. You get to learn something about the motors, you get to learn something about the history of the outboard industry, and it's a fun thing. The people you meet are very interesting. They come from all walks of life, and we try to encourage our members to restore a motor and bring it to the meet and run it. And so when you go to a meet, it's always interesting to see a motor possibly you've never seen run. What inspired me was to collect these motors was I have had outboard motors since I was a child, and I guess my first motor I had I was probably 8 years old, and it was a 1938 Johnson, and since that time I've probably had over 150 outboard motors. And back in the 50s, the motor that I was most interested in was the Martin motor, which was only made for 9 years. And in a period of time, I had every Martin motor that they made. The outboard motor is a very simple motor to work on, particularly the antique ones. Crescent wrench, a pair of pliers, screwdriver, you can just about take anything apart. Of course, if you have a good set of wrenches, you don't ruin the screws and the nuts and the bolts, but for someone just starting in the hobby, it's a minimal investment to get started. If you get further into it, you can spend any amount of money you would desire, but it's a low budget hobby, and it's very educational. The direction of our club is the education of the outboard motor. Well, my shop is a result of having a shop growing up and being in the real estate business and having a warehouse that I could work in. The shop space that I have is something that is separate from my home, It's behind my business, and it's something that my wife wouldn't want to see really around the house, but that works out great for me because she doesn't see the motors that come in or the motors that go out. So that works out great, and I collect what I want and restore what I want in that manner.
Well, that was really great to talk with Lewis, wasn't it? Let's go talk to Tom Anken. He's got this really great Indian motor. I got new stickers. What do you think?
I joined in 1989 when I got the interest to restore my mom and dad's old 58 mahogany boat. And everybody kept telling me it wasn't an antique at that time, but you couldn't find parts for it. So with coming with the Antique Outboard Motor Club, we found parts were readily available if you knew the right people. Unfortunately, I got terribly addicted to the outboard motors, and I probably have 250 of them in my collection now. Recently became more specialized and became a special interest group leader for the Indian outboard motor, which is what we have sitting here with us. And it's such a special motor because they only made it for about 7 months in 1930, even though they have two models. They have a 30 and a 31 model. And I've really enjoyed trying to find out the information about these motors. It's very difficult to find. There's not much written documentation. It's Depression time, and they just didn't have it out there. So I live on eBay every night just looking for whatever I can find. You know, it's a great hobby. When you have a product you're finished with, you have something you can be proud of. For instance, nobody will believe this, but this one sits in my living room at home. I tell everybody I have a very understanding wife. She also knows how much money I had to put into it, so I think she wanted it more for the insurance purposes. She didn't want somebody alleviating the garage and taking it from us that way. So, but in general, you know, younger people or even older folks, if they need something to do in their spare time, it's a treasure hunt. That's what really got me with the Indian. I go out there and just look for information. I try to get pictures of other Indians, get their serial numbers. That's my personal preference. We have outboard motor meets that are all over the state of Texas. And one day, a fella called me up and told me, he says, we were at a meet up in Grapevine and said there was an Indian there. And he says, guy wants to sell it. Nobody wants it. No one wanted to pay the price for it. And they talked with Lewis here at the shop, and he had called me. We got talking. He wanted Martin 200 the man had, so we called him, made him an offer, and on his way to Galveston one day, he brought the Indian by and the Martin 200 for Lewis. And pretty rough shape. The gas tank on this one there was electrolysis holes eat through it. It looked like somebody beat it with a ball peen hammer. I mean, it's really bad shape. The rope plate on top had been smashed by, looked like a broom handle had fallen down on it. The muffler was missing this standoff altogether. It just wasn't there anymore, and didn't have the old one to put back on it. So I got a hold of a friend up in Michigan. His name's Lee Holland. He's a special interest group leader for the Chris Craft Motors. And I talked him into taking on a project. He took the shiv plate, the gas tank, and the muffler, and he rebuilt them for me. So basically all I've done to this motor is clean it a little bit, put on the parts that he repaired, put some new wires on it because they were rotten, but basically it's just the way it was when I got it from the fellow that sold it to me. And I didn't find out until later the fellow that sold it to me actually had cancer and was very ill, and he's no longer with us now. So his legacy lives on. It's still here.
Thanks, Tom. Let's go talk to Tim Dugan. He's a new member from Dallas.
Well, I started really getting into antique outboard motors about 4 years ago, but I've been interested in old outboard motors my entire life. Ever since my dad had an old 1954 Evinrude 7.5 horsepower whenever I was very, very young. Yeah, I was raised in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and right not too far from the water, so I was lived and breathed boats and motors really my entire life. Well, I don't build motors, but I love tinkering with old outboard motors. I'd rather an old outboard motor than a new outboard motor. I just love the style. I love the look. I love the way they sound. My wife kids me because I mean the blue smoke that comes out of the old outboard, the old 7.5 horsepower outboard, and the smell of the oil. It just, you know, I just really enjoy that a lot. Right now, after about 4 years of collecting, I probably have about 8 or 9 of them. I can tell you which ones that run, and I have two 1956 15 horsepower engines. Both of those run. One's a Johnson, one's an Evinrude. I have two 3.5 horsepower light winds, which is an engine that friends of mine had whenever I was growing up in Lake Charles on the Bayou. They both run. One's a 58 model, that's the Johnson, and one's the 59, that's the Evinrude. We just changed the coils on the Evinrude yesterday, and because it seemed to be running on one cylinder, but after changing the coils, it runs great. It runs great. I've got two 22.5 horsepower Evinrudes. They're called Speedy Twins. They're the engines that you wrap the coil, the starter rope around the top and start them that way. There's no recoil starter to them. They're extremely heavy. They're about 160 pounds, I think, a piece. And but they sound like the Harley on a Harley, except it's on the water. They sound great. I've got two of those. They both run. I have a couple others, but that don't run. 7.5 horsepower Evinrude that I'm in the process of getting working. I've already done the ignition on it, but the lower unit needs to be replaced. So I've got a new lower unit. I just need to put it on. It's one of my to-do projects. I would tell them that it's extremely fun. I don't really know that much about the engines. I've loved them, like I say, for a long time. I don't know that much about them yet, but I'm learning, and I'm learning from the people that are in the club, that are in our Outboard Motor Club. I enjoy thoroughly working with everyone else. I love being able to talk and see the other people in the club. They're extremely helpful. I couldn't do it without them. But if I start and get to a point where I can't go any further, then somebody else helps me with it, and I just enjoy that. It's very fun, very enjoyable.
Thanks for dropping by here on the American Garage. We'll see you next time.